Oh, hello, everyone. It's always strange in these web meetings. It would have been much nicer to see everybody in person. But nonetheless, I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of SEESOX, the Southeast European Studies Division at the University of Oxford, as well as on behalf of Eurolife FFH Insurance Group. I'm Alexandros Sarrigeorgiou. I'm chairman of SEESOX, and I'm also chairman and CEO of Eurolife FFH. Allow me, as an introduction, to say a few words about SEESOX. SEESOX and Eurolife FFH have a 4-year partnership in supporting the good work that is being done at Oxford. SEESOX is a center which deals with the politics, economy, and society of Southeastern Europe. This center is interdisciplinary and involves numerous scholars from different backgrounds who explore regional and country geopolitics, political economy, European integration, history, and society of the region. Their work is academic, but it is also important to stress that the work is also policy relevant. We talk to governments, and it is one of the most prominent academic centers in Southeastern Europe globally, on Southeastern Europe globally. Greece, of course, has an important position at SEESOX in both research programs as well as teaching and other activities. The Greek program at SEESOX has an excellent record in the study of the different aspects of contemporary Greece, including politics, foreign policy, conflict resolution, migration, as well as regional relationships, especially with Cyprus and Turkey. During the recent years of crisis, and it does seem like we've had a crisis for many, many years now, SEESOX has intensified its research on Greece, and it has established a unique international project on contemporary Greek diaspora, exploring the relationship between Greeks in Greece and Greeks abroad in the context of not only the current and the previous crisis, but also more importantly, going forward. So we all have talked a lot about the pandemic, and I think it is important to focus on lessons learned from the pandemic. To use the phrase, keep calm and carry on, and this is what SEESOX has been doing with the same professionalism, the same integrity, the same intensity that it has been doing this work for the past few years. So Othon Anastasakis, who you see, he's, I would venture to say, the heart and soul of SEESOX. He's the director of SEESOX, along with the fantastic team. I think we have organized today a very interesting 1 hour, and the topic for this is something that I think we're all interested in. American elections for the past many, many decades have been extremely influential around the world, and certainly have been influential for Greece, but especially this election of a few weeks ago, thanks to the personalities and involved, I think has monopolized headlines. And on top of that, I think the prospects of what's coming are extremely interesting for all of us. So for this reason, we're especially happy to welcome today one of the most respected and well-known academics on the political economy of the United States, Professor Desmond King. He is Professor of American Government at the Department of Politics and International Relations, as well as Professorial Fellow at Newfield at the University of Oxford. And with us, again, we're happy to welcome Afentouli. is program manager at the NATO Public Diplomacy Division, but also has a long career as political commentator and diplomatic correspondent in the Greek media. She will be joining us as discussant, and I think this will make for a very interesting hour coming up. So Othon will coordinate the session, will introduce the participants, and will manage the Q&A. So I really want to thank everyone for being here, and on to you, Othon, to take it from here.
Thank you very much, Alexandros, and it's a great pleasure for me to co-organize this event with Eurolife, but also to chair the seminar on the US elections after Trump with such a prestigious and good friend, keynote speaker from Oxford, Desmond King, who is our Andrew Mellon Professor of American Government at the Department of Politics and International Relations, as well as Professorial Fellow at Nuffield College. This is the dual identity for Oxford for you. There are two positions for everyone. He has held a number of positions in the past, but also prestigious fellowships, and is a foreign member in a number of national academies. Desmond's interests range in the fields of US public policy, US political economy, welfare and labor market, racial inequality in the US, among others. So we are therefore particularly privileged in this crucial period of US uncertainty, but also change, to share his knowledge, experience, and wisdom. And Desmond will be followed by Afentouli, who herself is well known to the Greek audience as an analyst in Kathimerini and a diplomatic correspondent for the Athens News Agency, before she went on to become the NATO Public Diplomacy Division Program Manager, and that has allowed her to build relations with scholars like us, and indeed we have, for the past years, we have been engaged together in a number of projects that have to do with the region. Last but not least, I would like to thank Alexandros Sarrigeorgiou for working together on this particular event. Now, we have asked Desmond to speak for 20 to 25 minutes, for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can have question and answer in order to have a 1 hour session. So I would like to say also that you can start typing your questions in the question and answer box, which is where I will be viewing them and I will convey them to the speaker. Don't try to write in the chat, please only use the question and answer. And with that, Desmond, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Othon and Alexandros, for the lovely introduction. Thank you, and to the audience for joining us. I'm going to just try and cover some broad strokes about the election and where we are. I'm going to go through sort of 4 categories. So let me start with the election results themselves and the details. And I'm going to say that I'm really bad at predicting elections, but I predicted that Biden was going to win. And I thought that the Democrats were going to get a very substantial majority in the Senate and that they would maintain or increase their majority in the House. So I got it right about Biden, just. I'm wrong about the Senate, or I may be wrong, we'll see. But certainly some of the seats the Senate seats that I thought were going to go haven't gone. And in the House, they're going to retain, the Democrats are retaining majority, but they've lost a lot of seats. So it's been a remarkable election. And the thing that I got wrong, I think, which a lot of commentators got wrong, but some got right, is how intense and close the turnout has proved to be. 2020 is the highest turnout in presidential elections in US history. Biden received, Joe Biden, the Democratic candidate, now president-elect, received 80 million and more votes, which is the most votes for any presidential candidate ever in American history. And Donald Trump, the incumbent, received 74 million votes, which is the second highest votes historically received by any presidential candidate in American history. So that gives you some flavor of the scale of the election and the intensity of views about it and how close it was in some ways. Trump got Trump, who was a controversial election in 2016, managed to get an additional 5 million votes this time. So compared to, he got about 70 million last time, he now got 74 million. But Biden still soared ahead with 80 million in the popular vote. 158 million Americans voted. This is the largest ever, and it compares to 137 million in 2016. Turnout was enhanced by mail-in voting. But I think this turnout is really remarkable because America's in a public health crisis like most of our European democracies. So the scale and intensity of turning out for this is really quite extraordinary. Two groups made a difference to the turnouts. We know who Trump's main supporters are, evangelicals, white Americans in every category, particularly white Americans without college degrees, white males rather than white women, and so forth. And we know who Biden's supporters are: liberal Democrats, who are whites, African Americans, Latinos, and women. The two groups that changed the election were some Latino areas swinging strongly towards Trump. So Hispanic voters who had previously voted very strongly with the Democrats, some of these areas moved towards Trump. And secondly, white majority suburban areas swinging towards Biden, those two groups. And there are really only about 10 counties in the US which changed so significantly that the vote was won on that basis. That's what happened. I don't want to go into all of them, but one example is Maricopa County in Arizona. Biden won 45,000 votes there, which helped him win the state by 10,000 votes. He's the first Democrat to win in the county since 1948. So that's the sort of scale of change that we've been getting in this election. The Electoral College is still biased towards the Democrats, and even though Democrats have won the popular vote in 7 of the last presidential elections, they've only won the presidency 5 of those times. Biden won the popular vote by 6 million, but he only needed to lose 44,000 votes in the 3 states of Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin to have been defeated by Trump. So again, and in 2016, you may remember the Electoral College was really what determined it. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2 or 3 million, but Trump got the Electoral College. So it was quite a nerve-wracking election in some ways. I would note, despite this massive turnout and despite this massive vote for Biden over Trump by almost 6 million votes, this did not bring Senate seats for the Democrats. And it did not bring an overwhelming majority for Democrats in the House. So if we look back at massive presidential elections, Obama in 2008, Clinton in 1992, or Reagan in 1980, in each of those cases, the president entered office with a majority in his party in the Senate and in the House. This time, voters split their votes quite sharply. So those are the numbers. The second thing I want to talk about is how Biden is going to govern and what it's going to look like for a Biden presidency. Whatever happens, he'll be dominated by the pandemic and the economy. Those are the most pressing issues. But we really won't know until January whether it's going to be one of 2 scenarios. The first scenario is where he has no Senate majority. And we're waiting for the results of 2 Senate elections in Georgia on January the 5th. Both of the Senate seats there, for various reasons, are up for election. If the Democrats win both of them, that will mean they have 50 seats in the House and in the Senate, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris, will have the casting vote. So they will have a majority to vote with. Under that, if they don't win those seats, or if they win only one of them, which seems unlikely, then the Republicans will continue to control the Senate. Taking that scenario first, where Biden has no Senate majority, that means he's going to have an incredibly difficult time to get any major legislation through, like a fiscal stimulus, or a massive reform of tax, or a massive reform of healthcare. He will be dependent largely on executive action. That is, issuing orders that he has the power to as president under the Constitution. which is much more limited than people often realize, and as I'm sure many of you know. It will limit the sort of nominations he can get confirmed in the Senate, because the Republicans will demand more centrist and right-wing candidates than the progressives and reformers that that Biden might like. And he's already some nominations, all of which are very middle of the road and safe. So Janet Yellen is going to be chair of the Treasury, Secretary of Treasury. Anthony Blinken's going to be at State. Jake Sullivan is going to be National Security Advisor, and so forth. If there's no Senate majority, the president will have to rely on executive orders to reverse a lot of the Trump regulations, for example, in respect to the bureaucracy, environmental protection, workers' rights. But all of these will be subject to court review. He'll be able to set up task force, which can recommend and national effort against COVID. And he'll be able to use his powers as commander-in-chief and in foreign policy, where he's able to negotiate treaties, but he will need to have support from the treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. He'll obviously try to restore policy to foreign policy, and I'll say more about this in a moment, to a US multilateralism and to make treaties where he can. But it will be, without a Senate majority, it will be very difficult to make policy. And I don't see a new fiscal stimulus, for instance, getting through the Senate. And the head of the Republicans, the majority leader, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, has worked very strongly against the Democrats for the last 10 years. And that's the stance he will take. The other side, the other scenario is if Biden wins a Senate majority and he has this one vote, he's got 51 to 50. This will enable him to do quite a lot, though it's not a massive majority, and some legislation requires 2/3, but he would be able to have a substantial fiscal stimulus, to do tax reforms, to have budgetary reforms, health measures, and some more slightly quasi-radical nominees to positions. I think there's a caveat here about Biden, which is very important. He gave a speech yesterday, and he's given several speeches. He's talking about unity and appealing to all Americans. And this is what Obama tried to do in 2008. And this won't work in America at the moment. America is completely polarized. Many of Trump's voters, and I'm going to say more about this, believe the vote was illegitimate and so forth. Trump's strategy of legally challenging votes in states gives an impression of illegitimacy. But under either scenario, that is, if Biden has a majority in the Senate or doesn't, relations will change with Europe and internationally massively. There will be highly competent, highly professional heads of the department, State Department. Civil servants will be respected again. The US will rejoin the WHO or not leave it. I think they will begin to work with European partners on reforming the WTO and making sure the nominee gets appointed and getting American judges appointed to it. They will, however, retain the continuity of hostility towards China and continue the trade treaties with China of the sort we've talked about. But relations with Europe, which concern us, will be better, but I think there'll be a lot of questions. What sort of policy will Biden want to pursue towards Russia? What will they want to do about the digital agreements and the taxation on big tech companies? What will happen to the current EU-US trade deals? I think all of those are going to be more complicated. The US will, I'm sure, rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, and I'm sure it will try to work with Europe on resuscitating the Iran nuclear deal, but it will set conditions around this and try to make it tougher. But just as Biden will, I think, have better relations with Europe, he will also make sure that the US has better relations in the global order. He will have an image of rebuilding the order with the traditional with the appointment of traditional appointees who are experienced and capable, many of whom worked in the Obama administration. so we won't have, I think, more of the same in the same as Obama in foreign policy, because the world has moved on quite dramatically in the last 4 years in respect to China, Iran, Russia, Afghanistan, and so forth. And the climate crisis has got worse. But we will have to see what kind of policies will be developed in respect, say, to the Middle East, to Syria, to Israel, to Turkey, and so forth. I mean, Trump really did a deal, for instance, with Turkey about agreeing to US withdrawal from Syria, which left it open to Russia and Turkey as they wanted it. I think trade relationships, including issues with China, including issues about patent and knowledge theft, will be an issue which continues to be a major crisis, a major point of discussion. So that's the second scenario, briefly, about how Biden will govern, and I'm conscious of time, Othon, so I'll just whip along. Let me just talk thirdly about the Trump legacy. What's going to happen? There's an awful lot of people who voted for Donald Trump. I've seen one research poll which shows that 59% of Americans, let's say 60% of voters, think the American election was run and administered fairly, that it was efficient and it was reliable. But 21% of Trump voters only believe it was a fair election. 94% of Biden's voters believe it was a fair election, but 21% only of these 74 million voters believe it was fair. And indeed, Trump has not yet formally conceded the election, though he's now grudgingly allowed the Biden transition team to get going. He's been called upon to concede by lots of former national security advisors, including his own, and by former senior Republicans, but he's resisted. He injects this language of having been cheated out of the election, and this means that many of his voters think the election in some sense was illegitimate. What's going to happen to those voters? Where are they going to go? I think Trump is exhausted, but he's an exceptionally energetic person for his age. He spent 2 years before he was elected smearing the Obama presidency and charging that Obama was illegitimate. I think there's quite likely to be thoughts of doing this again for the next 4 years. There's a lot of talk about American democracy collapsing, fading during this period, and there have been extraordinary breakdowns in norms, extraordinary challenges to the constitutions, but the democracy is still there. The election has happened. There's been no charges of Russian interference this time or China interference in the election. All of the challenges that Trump has brought to the courts have been thrown out, and in some cases they've been ridiculed by the justices who say they make no sense. A lot now turns to the state of Georgia, where these two elections are going to happen in the Senate, and how the amount of money that will flood in there will be exceptional, and who's going to win that is extremely important. And will the Republicans try to seize power of the election in some ways that are illegitimate? I mean, this is going to be very, very important, particularly given how close the vote was between Biden and Trump in that state. Lastly, let me just talk before we go to I'm looking forward to Despina. Let me just talk about the partisan future, what's going to happen to the parties in America, and particularly to the Republican Party. The votes I gave you at the beginning about the scale of the turnout and the size of the vote for the two candidates. So Biden and Trump each got more votes than any other presidential candidate in American history. What's going to happen to the parties? I think it's going to carry on as it is for quite a while. The Republican Party has done very well out of Trump. Many of them don't like him personally. Many of them are appalled by his behavior and style. But Trump has proved to be a vote winner, and his policies have gone down well with the electorate. The senators who thought that the Republican senators who thought they were in difficulty in this election, in fact, did well and were quite Trumpist in their strategy. as I said already, if the Republicans retain the Senate, then they will just have a stonewalling strategy towards the Democrats. They'll rediscover fiscal rectitude, so they won't agree to any deficit spending. And they will do their best to delay appointments to government positions. The Republicans basically see the traditional Democratic coalition disintegrating, and they particularly hope to gain Hispanic voters and more Black voters. And they see the white working class as likely to move towards the Republicans. That's what's happened in the last couple of decades, and they see more of that happening. I think the scale of polarization between the two sides is really beyond repair. And this is a massive headache for the Democrats for future strategy. They talk a lot about the center and unifying, but this is just going to fall on deaf ears. And it may prove to be an energy which will not go anywhere. It's obviously right to engage in these sorts of platitudes, but to expect them to produce policy effects, I think, is wrong. And lastly, Trump has, as part of the Partisan, Trump has institutionalized a lot of his conservatism. He's been very successful at restructuring government, at reducing regulations. The Biden people will have the opportunity to roll back some of his regulations, say on the environment, immediately, but only ones that have been passed recently. And above all, Trump has institutionalized his conservatism in the judicial system. He has appointed an extraordinary number of lower federal court justices in the last 4 years. This is a very deliberate strategy by the Senate Judiciary Committee and McConnell. And of course, as you know, he's had the good fortune for him, but not for the Democrats, to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices in this period of 4 years, which is an exceptional number. And that ensures a very strong majority opinion on the court, ideologically hostile to government activism and to judicial activism. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Desmond, and that's been really insightful. We will have lots of questions. I hope, over to you, please, for your own thoughts.
Thank you very much, Othon. It's an honor to take the floor following Professor's intervention. I will try to be up to the task. But I would like also to thank you, SEESOX, and to subscribe to what Mr. Sarrigeorgiou said introductorily, because I can speak as an external partner of SEESOX, and I can only express our gratitude for the partnership we have throughout the years. Because in addition to what Alexandros said, SEESOX brought to Southeastern Europe an approach with European and Euro-Atlantic institutions that were missing before. I agree that is a unique organization in doing so, bringing this complex region closer to the European and Euro-Atlantic institutions. And for that, we are really grateful as, organization. So I'm glad that Professor King raised points that I would like to discuss. And of course, I will limit my short intervention to foreign policy. There is, I think, I don't say something new. There is a widespread relief in Europe following Biden's election. And we all expect, especially at the institutional level, that it will be, again, business as usual. The question is, what is business as usual in this period following the pandemic? Mm-hmm. And I would be glad to further discuss it, because it is maybe banal to attribute all the problems and the weaknesses to the pandemic. However, the current crisis magnified existing problems. And there is a commonality of problems, in my view, in both sides of the Atlantic. And to name only key ones: widening gap between societies and political institutions, widening inequalities as a result of the financial crisis and the digitalization of the economy, identity problems as the results of the migrations. So Biden and the new administration will do at the foreign policy front what is expected to do. This is predictable. What is less predictable is how Biden will work with Europe to cure the major problems the political West faces. In foreign policy, we should certainly expect a rebalance of the transatlantic relations, which were very harmed by Trump administration. NATO is the natural forum for this discussion, but what about the European Union, a key actor in the European continent? In my view, there are two interlinked key issues in the relations with European Union: US pivot to Asia and European strategic autonomy. If US will inevitably turn to Asia, this is what most of the analysts predict, there will be less interest in Europe and more pressures, more expectations that the Europeans take up tasks that the Americans up to now deliver, especially defense and security. So for the time being, we have only Macron talking about strategic autonomy. The other European countries, with Germany on the top, are very cautious. And rightly so, because strategic autonomy is not a realistic goal, even if the European Union decides to go for an autonomous defense. It would take years to have an autonomous defense, and also it will take enormous cost to the detriment of other policies, especially social policies. So we need US, but the question is if US need us. Can we envisage a strategic complementarity instead of autonomy? Can we have a fair bargain on this? Such a bargain or a grand strategy, you name it, can only be the product of an ambitious reform of both European and Euro-Atlantic institutions, meaning both NATO and the EU. NATO has started the process of reflection, and we will present next year what reforms NATO is going to implement to catch up with the current international reality. But the question about European states is how European Union is going to introduce reforms that are needed for a world that is not focused on Europe or the US, a world that is drifting towards the East. The pandemic, to conclude, brought to the surface challenges that know no borders: climate change, health, an abrupt change of working standards, reverse of our way of life, deep divide between working classes and digital workers, transformation of citizens to netizens. So do we need a transatlantic response to these challenges? We certainly do. But these challenges go beyond the responses we are accustomed to give with the traditional toolbox we have, both in NATO and European Union. So it will take more than business as usual from both sides of the Atlantic to explore the solutions. Let's to implement them. I mean, I'm open. I would be glad to listen what our participants have to say on these issues. Many thanks again.
Thank you very much, Ino. And I would like to turn to Desmond if he wants to respond. I know that you raised a lot of issues on the transatlantic dimension in particular. And just to say here that as Oxford University, we are obviously, as we all know, in a country that is in a very particular situation at the moment, doesn't know whether it's going to hold its special relationship with the United States. You yourself, you know, you've been talking about France, Germany. No word, of course, of the UK, although the UK is still a member of NATO. But Desmond, if you want to respond quickly, and then we can go with questions. Thank you.
Okay, those comments are great, and I really appreciate the focus on the security and foreign policy issues and military issues or defense. I didn't say, but I probably should have said that Britain, which is about in less than, where are we now, less than 6 weeks, is about to fall off a cliff, which I certainly voted against, and I'm pretty sure Othon did as well. And I'm appalled by it. But it's become very critical because of the Northern Irish issue. And Biden has made very clear his view that this treaty, the internal treaty in Britain to break the Northern Ireland Protocol, is unacceptable. I'm not sure where this is going to go, actually. I'm very, very nervous about it. And I think it's 50-50 that there's going to have to be a border. I'm also Irish, so I'm very interested in Ireland, that I think there's going to have to be a border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And that's going to be extraordinary if that happens. And that will be very, very problematic. By a border, I don't mean just casual checks. I mean something more substantial. I really don't see how that's going to be avoided. I entirely agree with Despina about two things. The shift to the east. I think the Biden administration will follow on the pivot that came with Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State under Obama, of taking more interest in China. And I think China is making it very clear that this is going to have to be necessary. China is going to be moving away from Britain. It's not going to really be interested in Britain except to buy some stuff, and it's going to push relations with China. My only sense about and I entirely agree, business as normal is the wrong way to think about it. I do feel there's a bit of deja vu in the comments about, is Europe going to develop its autonomous policy, defense policy? Is it going to stand up? Is it going to be willing to spend more on military and less on welfare policy? I feel like we've been having that discussion for several decades, and I'm not sure that's going to get any more intense. I think there are questions about the US working with Europe in respect to the Middle East, to whatever happens in Afghanistan, and in respect to relations with Russia. And I think the issues, particularly, it seems to me, the German-Russian relations remain very complicated and are ones where it may take up more of the Biden presidency's time than they had expected.
Thank you, Desmond. And I would like to ask Alexandros Sarrigeorgiou first his permission that we can have a half an hour question and answer discussion, but also, to ask the first question to our speaker. Thank you.
So thank you. And